Welcome, everybody, to this month's Inside webinar series at Carrier's Edge. This month, we're talking profitability. And joining me today is Chris Henry, COO at KSM Transport Advisors. And before we go any further, I will let everyone know that if you have any questions or comments, you can drop them right in the QA and we'll get to them as best we can. And if we happen to run out of time, we'll try and get those questions answered anyway and send them out to you. Recording of this webinar will also be shared later on. So here we go. Chris Henry, how are you, sir?
Doing great, doing great. Great to be here. Appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about profitability or some cases lack thereof in this current market environment.
Now, before we really get into it, I will say that I got a chance to get a sense of what you're talking about back at the Best Fleets event in April, and it was a lot of people were talking about it. It was very engaging, and basically, it's like here are your Coles notes for figuring out how to run a tight profitable business. And so today, I kind of want to dig into some of that stuff and see what some of the practical things that people can do, just because things are it's not exactly a welcoming economic environment right now. And so any little edge you can get is going to pay dividends. So first, hey, Chris Henry, who are you, and
For sure.
and who do you work for?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry over or close to just over 25 years. Time's flying by. Spent about 15 of those years as a partner in an insurance company that served the trucking industry. Um, that turned into a desire to bring technology and benchmarking to the trucking industry. So back in 2014, my partner and I, Ray Haight, we formed a company called StackUp. So that exposed me to a big market opportunity within trucking to help carriers better understand their costs relative to their peers. So we built that company up over 8 years, and we actually sold that to FreightWaves, which most people will know is a media company focused on trucking. Spent a little bit of time with them, and then joined Carrier's Edge. So I spent some time working with Carrier's Edge. Great experience. Got to be involved in the Best Fleets program, which I know, Rick, you're heavily involved in. So it opened up my eyes to a lot of the more qualitative aspects of a trucking operation, not just the quantitative dollars and cents and revenue, profit, et cetera. And that turned into an offer to join KSM Transport Advisors. So KSM Transport Advisors, or KSMTA, is a transport consulting company based in Oklahoma City. We're a division of KSM Business Services, which is a 600 employee tax and accounting firm based in Indianapolis. So we're a small group, only 11 people on our team, but we're mighty. We work with 50 different carriers all over the road, truckload companies throughout North America. And our primary focus is helping them better understand where profit is accruing and where profit is potentially leaking out of their freight network. So their mix of customers, lanes, geography, time, revenue, et cetera. So we call that process freight math.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so can you give me a sense of the landscape right now for the industry? I mean, we all kind of have a sense of things aren't great,
Yeah.
but what sorts of things are you saying?
Yeah, so it's been basically two and a little bit, 2 years, 3 months of really poor performance from a market perspective. And the one thing to reinforce is that regardless of how niche or niche your operation is, you're not immune to the market ebbs and flows of trucking. So even if you're a specialized tanker operator, there is market forces that are affecting you right now. But if you're a traditional drive-in reefer operator, it's been a tough go for the last 2 years. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of bright lights in the near future in terms of improvement. So as an example, right now, the Hurricane Beryl is affecting the United States, which is very unfortunate. Those sometimes turn into momentary reprieve in terms of rate pressures for truckload companies. So capacity gets tightened, those kind of things. But other than these, one-off situations, we don't see things dramatically improving on both the supply and demand side. So yeah, sorry to be the buzzkill, but that's what we are seeing right now.
And those pressures affect not just trucking companies, but other players in the industry that's also ultimately going to filter back. 10 minutes ago, 10 minutes before we started, someone sent me an article about insurance companies in general, non-transportation ones, property insurance in Florida, and how it's basically in free fall. And
Mhm.
so if you're a trucking company and those pressures are hitting you and they're also hitting insurance companies and all these other players, well, I mean, there's all these moving parts, and it's just it's too much for one person to kind of take in the enormity of it. So all you can really do is kind of focus on your own controllables, right?
Right. No, there's so many interrelated vendors, service providers. You mentioned insurance. So there's a consolidation happening within the insurance carrier market, both direct insurers as well as the secondary or reinsurers. And, insurance companies are typically well capitalized, especially the ones that can, wait out these different market cycles, but they always hit their, rate of return. So when, everything flushes out, it's going to be very difficult for those carriers that haven't done a good job of investing in safety and watching, the incidence rates and those kind of things. So it's going to be tough for those carriers that have taken their eye off the ball during this unfortunate downturn.
Right. Now, given that the economic conditions are so tough, surely the government must be like, hey, let's give everyone a break. Let's not make any massive regulatory changes. That should make things easier. And
Mhm.
yet I feel like that's not the case. Um, on the regulatory side, more headaches.
Yeah, I think the regulatory landscape in US and Canada uh, is fairly different. Uh, y- Many of these regulations happen at a state level and then get the attention of at the federal level. One of the ones that gets a lot of press is the AB5, so the independent contractor regulations. And there's a large number of carriers with massive independent contractors that touch on pretty much or transport via multiple states. So that's a big thing that we see a lot of carriers moving away from, especially if they're 20-30% independent contractor owner operators, is protecting the future and saying, okay, this model may not be an option going forward, even though it hurts us, and considering the current market pressures, we want to move away from that model. So we see more and more carriers moving towards a company fleet, almost entire company fleet operation. Um, so that's a big one. And similar pressures are happening in Canada with Driver Inc. getting a lot of attention at the federal level, as well as provincial levels as well, and a lot of press to boot. So
And a lot of press. Absolutely right. Now on AB5, and I don't want to sort of go down that rabbit hole, but I initially misinterpreted based on the Canadian version. I think there are like 6 factors for determining, and it's sort of on a balance. There's no one factor that's going to be, oh, you're automatically an employee. It's sort of on a balance of understanding. But that
right.
is, and I had assumed AB5 was something similar, but no, that B in the AB5 in ABC test is the killer, right? It's a
Yeah.
one and done.
Yeah, and individual states are basically making their determination based on the hardcore version as well as the modified version. But California would be the toughest one to be basically qualified or classified as an independent contractor. And because of that, you see some carriers failing due to the fact that they have predominantly independent contractor relationships. So they can't be on the hook for those long-term liabilities related to reclassifying their drivers as company fleet because they built up their cost base around a different model. But we're starting to see that, take shape in a similar fashion, New Jersey and some of the East Coast states as well. So it's having a meaningful effect. So obviously the market is the biggest concern, the biggest issue, but I would say the AB5 and independent contractor regulations would be definitely in the top five for sure.
It's not making it any easier.
No.
So with that, it seems sensible then to be able to distill down a set of kind of best practices for carriers, sort of in the field of all these other things going on. These are some of the things that I can focus on, I can do here and now. And one of the things that jumped out was you came up with 12 traits of successful companies, right? If you want to protect things that you have, and sort of really run those numbers tight, but ultimately fruitful, kind of focus on these things, right? So what were, a couple of those?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll give you some backstory too on the whole 12 traits article series. So I've worked with over 300 trucking companies in my career, saw the financials on almost all of them. So I'm not an operational guy, but I can make observations in terms of what things exist within high performing companies and what things potentially don't. So the whole series, which is available via freightmath.com, so that's freightandmath.com. You can sign up for our newsletter, but all the articles are hosted there. It was a way to basically communicate that if you can string together, these traits within your organization and consistently operate with those traits and the principles that we describe, you're going to have a better chance of having a sustainable trucking operation. And by that, I mean, when the market goes up, your margins are going to expand at a much more rapid pace. And likewise, when the market goes down, so there's always a roller coaster, you'll never be immune to it, your margins are not going to erode as fast. So that was the whole purpose of that. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback on it, and that's expanded some additional articles. But if I were to choose the number one, it would be transparency. So the companies that we used as the role model for this 12 trait series, we distilled it down to 4 role model companies, ranging in size from 80 trucks to 2,000 trucks. Transparency was by and far the one that emerged as the biggest trait. And when I say transparency, it's transparency of communication, transparency of financial performance, transparency of operational performance, and it's right from the C-suite to the driver's seat. So being able for a person in the driver's seat or on the front lines in operations to understand how they're doing on a month-to-month, quarterly basis, and being able to connect how their performance impacts the financial and operational performance of their business is crucial. 2 of those companies that we use as role models were what we call ESOPs, so employee stock-owned companies. That's kind of a unique thing within the U.S., but they're forced to be transparent. They were already transparent to begin with, but they were forced to be even more transparent because the employees own the company effectively. So that is definitely the number one of the 12 traits that we observed.
So having worked for different companies, some of which have been more transparent and some much, much less. If I'm watching this and I don't think my company is there, but I'm trying to connect the dots. So if I look at maintenance, which is another trait, I can see how looking after maintenance is going to affect my bottom line. I can't. Why is it that a more transparent company, in the way that you described, gets me towards profitability? I don't get it.
Well, I think having more eyeballs on anything is good, whether that's in business or in life. You get more opportunities for feedback. It can create a lot of noise if you don't put it on the right rails. But when you talk about transparency, It's basically combined with education. It's not just here's what we made last month. It's communicating into a way that any user would be able to understand your performance, relative benchmarks to others, relative benchmarks to your past performance. So that's a critical thing. But one of the things that we have definitely observed, and we've had communications with lots of readers and companies in this regard, is it allows you to identify high performing talent. So if you make data available to more people, the chances of um, identifying people that can do something with that information in a positive manner are greater. So if you keep all your cards close to your chest, you have less chance of feedback, and you also have more stress on those people that have those that access. So the smaller the pool of people with access to the information, the greater the difficulty in times like this.
So you mean like a practical example? You're being transparent about the numbers and what's working, what's not working, and you had no idea, but there's a driver out there, 20 years experience, who's like, you know what, you're doing this on this lane, but actually, if you do it on this one, you're going to have a different result. That kind of thing.
Yeah, and if a perfect example, if you distill it down to the driver level, the driver can observe that they're doing broker to broker to broker loads. Now, if they're just putting in their time, that's one thing. But if you make it a concerted effort to say, hey, here's the situations we're dealing with now. We're trying to keep you busy. Um, Making the carrier aware of potential business opportunities within that network is something that a lot of carriers are doing really effectively. So the drivers are sitting at a dock and they see 5 other carriers at that dock, and they know that they need volume out of that origin or destination. They can say, hey, you need to talk to XYZ and this particular person because it looks like they have a plentiful amount of freight, because I'm seeing it every day. Making that feedback loop available is part and parcel to being transparent.
And I suppose that's also going to help with retention, right? So if I have no idea what's going on, but I hear in the news all these things, I'm worried. I'm
Yeah.
worried. And as a driver, and if I'm looking, well, maybe down there, maybe the grass is greener. On the other hand, if I'm in the loop on what's going on, and the company can say, look, things are tough, but here's what we're doing, and we're actually okay, then I
Yeah.
can come down a bit.
Yeah. All of the communication with regards to transparency, financial and operationally, has to be tied to some kind of commentary. So how are you doing, again, relative to others? So
Hmm.
having access to benchmarking data, how are you doing relative to your past history? And then, making sure, any fears are addressed head on as opposed to, percolating based on, data that didn't have any commentary. So that's a big danger. So any carrier owner, any CFO that's been in the industry a long time is going to tell you that it is a roller coaster from a financial perspective. You can have one month where you're making, depending on the size of the carrier, $1 million. The next month you're losing $2 million. So you have to, when you're communicating that to a wider audience with less experience, you have to put it in context as to this is what we expect, and these are the reasons why we expect this.
Right. Side note question. Um, Before you got into this, were you sort of by default a numbers geek, or were you more, did you kind of fall into that and you were more sort of people or analytics or
Yeah, statistics, the data has always been something that I've been attracted to. So when I was a kid, baseball cards, basketball cards, you could ask me any question about any hockey player, basketball player, and I'd be able to tell you where they played college, what their stats were in college, what their hometown was, all that kind of stuff. So definitely that's where I started thinking, from a statistical perspective. And then, once we got into benchmarking, I did treat them kind of like their own baseball cards. So I knew in my mind, what their batting average was, what their operating ratio was, what their, individual cost per miles were. And when I saw those change, you could automatically, it's something that I really connected with. for sure.
Right, right. You start playing Moneyball with your company.
Exactly.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So let me look at one other of those traits before I get into, I think, probably the most compelling. This one's for me a little bit. There was an article, oh, maybe 2 weeks ago. I feel like it might have been an overdrive, but it was about um, freight lines where you are taking a loss, right? So
Mhm.
things are not going well, and how, you know whether it's a backhaul, whatever it happens to be. And this is a problem because so many companies are, just trying to keep the lights on. They're taking these things where they're actually losing money. But one of your traits is actually about connector freight, which
Mhm.
kind of looks at losing lanes, but with a different purpose.
Yeah. So a couple things that we do is we look at a client's freight network from a geographic perspective. We look at it from a time perspective and obviously a revenue and cost perspective. So we have these defined market areas where we can observe loads into an area, loads out of an area. And one of the things that we see, especially with smaller carriers, is with less defined footprint, we see behavior where when they get to an area, they stay there, or they basically they're looking for a load to get back home.
Right.
So it's basically like a hub and spoke type model. The trait that you're talking about is basically using connector freight to bridge one area of profitability to another. So basically expanding your thought process in terms of where your business operates and using the connector freight or backhaul freight that's typically connected to broker freight. And obviously you can't build your business based on broker freight only, but broker freight does have a spot in everyone's network in the sense that you can't be a business development person, especially on a smaller carrier, and serve every market area. You only have so many customers that you can service properly. But one of the things that carriers can be myopic about is where those opportunities are within an area. So if they can't get to it with a direct customer load, they don't go there. What we're saying is use broker freight appropriately to connect you from one geographic territory or market area to another. So your one-way profitability on it may be poor, but it's
Mhm.
getting you to another area where we call islands of profit. You can generate profitability and then move on to the next load. And a general rule of thumb is you want to have no more than one broker load for every two direct customer loads. But if used appropriately, the sum of those three can be greater than if you waited for another shipper load instead of looking for a broker load. So,
Hmm.
it is generalizing a little bit, but we're seeing a lot of that behavior right now is, okay, I'm going to lay over until I can get a shipper load, or I don't go over here because I don't have a direct customer load.
Got it. Got it. Okay. All right. So yeah, again, so being a little more strategic.
Mhm.
Um, there's one more. There's one more before I want to get to the big safety one. And this is
Mhm.
about legacy focused leadership.
Mhm.
So I have some thoughts on this, but I want you to tell me first what you mean by that.
Yeah, so we work collaboratively with a company called the Tenney Group. So they're an investment banking company based in Tennessee. They work on behalf of buyers who are ready to sell within the trucking industry. And Spencer Tenney, the owner of that company, um, he had given a presentation about 10 years back where uh, he put valuation number two in terms of the priorities of the owners that he's dealt with. And number one was legacy. What happens to their business? What happens to his or her employees? What happens to the communities they serve after the deal closes? So instead of it being solely focused on a multiple of earnings, it was, are you going to keep my people at these locations? How are we going to keep providing for the communities that you operate in? And that could be either using cash proceeds from the sale, or making a stipulation that this is what the buying company has to do for the communities they operate in. So that was one that I didn't put a lot of credence in, quite frankly,
Mhm.
until we started talking to more of these companies that we've identified as high performers and ones that have sold their operations over the last 5 to 6 years. And that was, the number one that came up. And it wasn't just lip service. It was, yeah, money's important. You have to get, if you have a better than market company, you want to get a better than market valuation. But number one was, I've already made my money. If I'm successful in trucking over the long term, I've already made, the cash that has provided for me and my family. I want to make sure the people that got me there are well taken care of, and that includes the employees and the communities they operate in.
Hmm. So this is kind of the difference between a politician and a statesman, right? Someone who's is just thinking beyond the next election, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, the quote is basically, plant trees that you're not going to, you know,
Enjoy the
benefit
shade
from
of.
the shade of. So.
Right. Yeah. 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 Excellent. Okay. So there was something in your talk at Best Fleets and in these 12 trait blog articles about safety, and there was a number in there that kind of shook me in terms of unlocking profitability. And well, it was something like a 10 cent per mile advantage just by looking after your safety. And this seemed enticing, but almost absurd that it could be that much. So before we get all the way down there, right. So what is it when it comes to the trade of safety? Just like being compliant, or there's something more robust?
Yeah, so basically it's a continuous reinvestment in safety and looking at safety as a profit center. So every company that does safety well, it's part of their culture. They want their drivers to come home safe. They want their people to come home safe. But the incentive is that it pays handsomely to do so. And it's the analogy I use is like consistently working out over 5 or 10 or 15 years. You're not going to benefit from, just putting dash cams in your trucks. You have to have follow-on programs in order to generate the lower incident rates, the results of investing in safety, but it's going to take time. It's going to be a lot of manual. It's going to be communications. It's going to be a lot of difficult situations. But what it comes down to is within the carriers that we've worked with and I've worked personally with, there's a wide disparity in terms of the insurance cost per mile between a top performer, top quartile performer, and quote unquote the bottom quartile performers. And I would say that the peer groups that we look at are disposed or predisposed to high performance anyway. So the disparity can be even wider. But among the carriers that I've worked with, it ranges from 2 cents per mile total insurance premiums, deductibles, any kind of captive insurance fees, all the way up to 24, 25 cents per mile. That's the extreme tails. What we're seeing right now is a top performing company being 4 cents per mile, and a top performer company overall, outside of safety, being in the 15 to 20 cent range. So that's where that 10-cent mile gap exists, is between those two pools.
Right. 24 cents out at
Yep.
the wow. And that isn't just insurance, right? A big chunk of it, I suppose, is.
Yeah, it's accident damage. So basically, it's
Mhm.
either you pay a deductible to an insurance company, or it's your own self-insured retention or risk. So if there's accident damage, that should be in the insurance category within a P&L. It shouldn't be going into maintenance because it's a fortuitous event. It wasn't planned. It was an accident. That should be put into the deductibles or self-insured retention bucket within your insurance category or expense line. It also includes excess coverage, so a lot more US-based carriers are taking additional liability coverage in order to kind of weigh down that risk of having a nuclear verdict. So even with that additional insurance coverage built in, the 4 cents per mile is a realistic target for a company of 80 trucks all the way up to, tens of thousands. But a top performing company, it's not related to company size. It's related to how you're investing, how you're deploying safety, safety having a seat at the executive team, understanding that, the benefits of investing in safety may not pay off in next quarter or 5 quarters from now, but over time, you're going to be incrementally rewarded by an insurance carrier, or if you get to a point, be able to take more and more of your own risk, whether it is taking on more of the retention yourself or joining a captive insurance program. So really, I see insurance as or investing in safety as having a massive compounding snowball effect for a carrier, which, considering where we are today, 10 cent per mile advantage over your competition right out of the gate is huge.
That's the difference between keeping your lights on and not in some
Yeah,
cases.
literally staying in business or not. Absolutely.
Right, right. And so I'm imagining this from the perspective of a company who wants to take this on and isn't exactly sure how. And there is, like you say, like going to the gym, it comes down to the granularity of like doing those very specific exercises over and over and over again. So it can be tough though to sell, let's say training, right? I want to train my drivers and training them on this thing this month and that thing the next month and keeping that up. It is tough to see right away the dividends. But you describe how down the road it's going to snowball that way. How do you sell that? Let's say you're a safety manager and you want to sell it to your boss. Like, look, this is where the safety investment is in training. Let's do this.
Yeah. So the cost of training, the cost of safety-based technology has dropped rapidly. So you no longer have these massive upfront investments on a hardware perspective and labor perspective, and you don't have the onboarding costs that you would normally have, a decade or longer ago. So the key thing is you need to establish a baseline. So you have to be able to connect, input versus output. So being able to, if we're focused specific on drivers, is to isolate the behaviors that predict future bad results, which eventually turn into higher insurance premiums. It has a long tail effect. So it takes time to accrue the benefits, but it also takes time to, eliminate, the bad behaviors that have been built up on insurance company books for a specific carrier and, set of drivers. So the biggest hurdle has been effectively removed. So the cost of dash cams has been steadily dropping over time. The amount of data that you can get out of those dash cam providers has improved. Almost all of them nowadays has an open API and basically out of the box scoring mechanisms. But with those tools, you have to have a follow-on effect. So if this happens, this is like Boolean logic. If this happens, what are you going to do with it? So if you're just going to record it and not do anything with it, not going to show the data to your people, what's the point? You're not going to have any sort of method. So with drivers being a hot commodity, even though it's maybe considered less so in today's environment because the retention rates have gone up and turnover has also dropped. It's not going to be okay, you've done this, we're going to get rid of you soon. You have to have a path for a driver to basically improve. And you can't do that without having each of those dots connected. The hardware, the software, the data, and then the follow-on training to be the reinforcement loop.
Hmm, I love it. You don't happen to have, without naming names, do you have a rags to riches, like a success story, a company that you've worked with that was just maybe not trash, but
Mhm.
had some opportunities and you were able to.
Yeah, so using our freight math model, it immediately, once we have the data, so we're extracting 72 different data points on every single load at both on what we call an order level, kind of a summary level,
Mhm.
as well as at a dispatch level. So we're capturing the timestamps between every single stop that the driver makes, all the related geography, chronology, revenue, costs associated with that load. And then we put them all together in this network-based model. So we're not just looking at how a load performed on its own. We're looking at how you perform going into a given origin area, how you're doing on a given load, and then how you're performing going out of the destination area. So when you connect those all together, we assign a score to a load that gets rolled up to a customer, to a lane, etc. And what it allows you to easily identify is where the profit is leaking in your quote unquote network. So that is an iterative process that we then say, okay, this is a network that you should operate in. Here are the lanes where you're profitable. Here are the lanes that you're maybe not so profitable, but they're key component to your network. So we want to keep those. So it's really basically iterating over time. And one example we have is one of our clients that is a big proponent of the freight math model, has been a great source of testimonials for our company. They're 85 truck operation. They were in a position where there was a lot of pressures on them financially. It was in the middle of a rate downturn. Um, so like I said before, no carrier is immune to the market forces. So they had that, and then they also had uh, an unwielding customer that represented about 35% of their business. So what we did is we went in, we analyzed their network, and we said that customer who they've had for 20 plus years, the core part of their network was the biggest source of financial trouble for their operation. So any carrier, when you tell them, you're going to have to get rid of 30% of your business, obviously there's some concerns, but over
Sorry, just to
time,
clarify, they were a source of
it,
risk or a source of actual trouble, like
yeah, could be
both.
both,
Yeah,
right?
okay. Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't do it in a systematic fashion, that is getting rid of the freight, starting, what we do is we start with the worst of the worst, we call it toxic freight. And then we start chipping away at that until, you have replacement freight to make up for it. So with that client, they had to reduce the tractor count because when you're reducing customer capacity more rapidly than you normally would have, that means you're going to get rid of tractor capacity. So there was a lot of pain in the first year or so, but it dramatically transformed their operation. It transformed their culture from looking at freight from a one-way perspective and then looking at it from a holistic network perspective. So that's a byproduct of our model, is it allows you to see holistically where a load fits in your network versus where a group of loads, a customer, a lane fits in your network. So it's really enlightening. We have many stories like that, but that was, I think, the most rewarding one for our business.
That would be terrifying though. Like if you're really looking to uh secure your footprint and someone comes to you and says, get rid of some of your business.
Yeah, 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 and 30% is a massive number. So
Now, if I recall, one of the other traits though connected to that is having willingness to shrink.
yep,
Right, right, right.
yep,
And
absolutely. Yeah, no,
that,
yeah, sorry, we cut you off there.
no, that's specifically about tractor count or elsewhere.
Yeah, so the main when you talk about capacity, in other industries, it's, having throughput in a factory, those kind of things. But the main method of production in trucking is a tractor. And that also includes, drivers connected to those tractors. So one of the things that we see as the biggest vanity metric in the industry is tractor count. So the first thing even I ask is, how many tractors do you have? How many trucks do you have? And that gives me indication of what the revenue is, blah, blah, blah. That has nothing to do with profitability. If there, I can, give you hundreds of trucking companies that have over 1,000 trucks that haven't made money in years, and vice versa. Lots of trucking companies that have remained profitable during this downturn. So it has no connection to profitability. What we feel is more important is what we call a minimum margin threshold. So it's like having a minimum rate of return required for the business for the investment that the owners are making in the trucking operation. So it's a very disciplined approach to say, okay, if I can't make X, then I'm not going to add capacity and dilute the profitability even further. And companies like Heartland Express have done it in a big and public scale. When margins have eroded, they've cut their network, they've shrunk their network, they've shrunk the tractor count. They're doing that right now. So that would be one that, if you look for a public example of how to be disciplined, read a couple Heartland Express annual reports or quarterly reports, and you'll get a feeling about how they operate their business. And it's not being cutthroat, it's being disciplined on connecting the realities of the risks that exist in a trucking operation with the rewards that you can potentially get. So, if I were going to invest in a trucking company, knowing how many variables and risks that are outstanding, I'd want 30% or more, but you can't get it. You can't get those kind of returns in trucking. So being disciplined to saying 10% or even 8% is the minimum threshold we're going to use from a net margin perspective is a really good starting point. But it also takes a lot of work to get there.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring this back again to safety, because I think I can see that there are a bunch of safety folks in the audience. But before I do, this is going to be connected. I want to talk a bit about data. And so you were saying that you've got some granularity there that you focus on, but for someone who's not used to that, for a company owner who's not used to that, and suddenly you've got all this data coming in, like where do you start? How do you know what to focus on, and what not to focus on?
Yeah, so our model is very prescriptive. So we need these specific data points. I won't get into all of them in order to do what we need to do. So if they don't have that capability, so their TMS does not provide that data, unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do other than saying, when you're looking for a new TMS, in order to operate successfully in a trucking company, in trucking industry, you're going to have this data in order to look at your business the right way. Then we combine that with the financial side. So what's going on in their general ledger? So most companies we can deal with regardless of how organized or disorganized their general ledger is. So we can map those to what we call an activity-based costing model in order to calculate margins. But if they don't have the logic and the individual data points that we need to look at their operation, unfortunately, we can help them. But the good news is most of the well-known transportation management systems have that logic and data built into them. So if they do have one of those, it's very rapid for us to give them something that's very actionable.
Right. So about, I think it was 2 months ago now, back in May, we did a webinar with Trevor Bent from Eason's, and the trick with him is he had spent time as a safety manager and had spent time as a CEO and sort of had that perspective from both of those sides. And one of the big takeaways from his talk was focusing on your safety KPIs in particular, in terms of really reining in where you're bleeding. And the big recommendation for safety folks is building your own personal brand of continuous improvement, not just compliance. So figure out what your KPIs are, focus on those, and build those out. So if you're a safety guy and you don't have the authority to say buy the new TMS or whatever it happens to be, what sort of things should someone be focusing on within their own controllables? Maybe they don't have company wide authority, but they've got controllables in that frame.
Yeah, so safety specific, that really exists in a realm outside the TMS itself. And I would say bluntly that if a safety manager has resistance to a modern dash cam hardware software connect package, then their ownership isn't serious about operating profitably. And if they don't have resistance, then they have out of the box insight, not just from one, but many, many carriers that have provided feedback. So I won't get into the names of them, but the ones where they have an open API and they have a built-in safety scoring system
Mm-hmm.
that can be customized to the unique nuances of the business, that gives them more than enough of the leading indicators to get started on tracking what's good, what's bad. And a lot of companies have started having, dashboards of benchmarks from, here's how you're doing versus your peer group to here's how you're doing to these individual drivers. You're number 99 or number, 3 on the list of top 100. So being able to use a little bit of peer pressure with their driving force to influence safety as well.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. All right. Um, wow, where do we go from there?
Mhm.
Oh, I did have a question. There was a phrase that came up in your blog articles, and maybe we covered a bit of it: data sanity versus data vanity. And now one of your vanity metrics was about trucks. Is that basically what that means?
Well, so one of the things that we, try to get companies to think about is taking inventory of the data that they have and attempting to put guardrails on that data, whether it's through automation, um, mins and maxes within a certain field, et cetera. So we have insight into how bad data can be at a TMS level, because probably the biggest time that we spend is cleaning bad data. So it's time-based data, timestamps of when a driver stopped and started, so when they arrived, when they departed, those kind of things. So we have lots of companies that have said, oh, we're looking at these, very expensive optimization software projects. And the reality is a lot of them just can't get there because the data that they've built up over time is unreliable. So when they go to optimize a basket of loads or, drivers or transactions, they're optimizing a data set that has poor quality control.
Mm,
So the point about data sanity is really spending time, which almost, every company can say that, they have a certain amount of deficit with regards to quality control, with regards to their data. So that trait, that article was reinforcing that you need to have a data strategy, you need to focus on quality control, you need to know what your KPIs are and how they affect the bottom line. Tractor counts don't affect the bottom line. It's just out there. It's a byproduct of what they do. You need to focus on what metrics are actually driving the bottom line, driving your safety behaviors, et cetera.
right. All right. So circling back to my imaginary company that is having a hard time and doesn't know where to start, where can I start today in terms of just getting better?
Yeah, so easiest thing to start with any carrier is to do a look at on a load by load basis the one-way profitability. So get in the mindset of looking at where it came from, where the origin was, where were they prior to that load, where was that tractor prior to the load, and factoring in the time and the empty miles, the destination of the load, and then combining in what was the revenue associated with it and what was the likely cost associated with it. So it would be, all your big buckets like driver comp, fuel, those kind of things. If you can get to the point where you have a realistic number on a one-way basis from a profitability perspective, it's not a big leap to look at a given basket of loads from a network perspective. But that is the starting point that everyone has to make. And we actually recommend people do this on their own. So we have in our articles, we have ways that they can do that, both on the financial side, so building out the costing model, and then also on the load by load side, looking at what are the factors that go into calculating margins on a load by load basis. So that would be the number one starting point if you're talking about from a freight math or network profitability perspective.
And you had, I think you'd used this term back in April. Is that about assessing, was it power lanes and spider lanes?
Yeah, so that will lead into that same behavior. So once you're able to connect the dots from a network perspective, we'll identify, or they can identify lanes that have low density versus lanes that have high density. So the unique origin to destination pairs and ranking them from highest density to lowest density. In the bottom of the barrel, the bottom 25% in that density listing are going to be also highly correlated to low profitability. So if you have low density, it's just like anything else. If you don't do it very frequently, you're not going to get good at it. But if you are, what we say is efficiency. The density will build efficiency. That efficiency will ultimately build velocity, so you're going to be able to do it quicker. So you're going to be able to accrue gains at a much more rapid pace, and that will ultimately mean you have a more profitable operation. So pairing out those low density lanes over time, where you don't have potentially, customer freight on the back end or on the front end, is something that a lot of carriers can do in terms of a low hanging fruit thing.
Now, a lot of these features and traits seem really straightforward. I imagine they're very obvious to you. Well, of course you do this, of course you do that. When you are engaged with a client, do you find that your biggest roadblock is culture or
Oh, absolutely.
willingness to?
Yeah, no, it's connection to specific customers. So painting a customer that was really good for you 10 years ago and this with the same brush as where they are
Oh,
today. So that's the biggest resistance. We can't do that. Or, in this market environment, saying you should look into a price increase. A lot of people have just reserved themselves to, oh, we can't get price increases. But there's always opportunities in any carrier's basket of freight to ask for more money. So you have to, just like shippers are coming back to the carriers and asking for more gains, more savings, you have to continually using the same behavior with your customers. Otherwise, a gap between the market and you will gain or grow over time. So even if it's one customer that you have an opportunity to ask for more money, a price increase, do it and do it often.
and do it often.
Yep.
All right,
In trucking, you have to. There's no other way.
it sounds kind of frightening, but okay.
Yep.
Um, so I did have a question, and maybe the answer is there's no difference. But if you've got like a 5 truck newbie company, or you've got a 50 truck company that's changing hands through a generation, or you've got a big giant fleet that is having trouble managing retention, is your approach to all of them basically the same?
The starting point is the same, but which path we go down is different. So an example would be, once we understand where your network is, we're going to basically build a visual footprint of here are the areas you serve from a density perspective, loads in, loads out. And then there's also going to identify low density areas. Typically, those low density areas are connected to an undisciplined recruiting network. So where they're generating the most profit isn't a direct one-to-one connection to where they're recruiting their drivers.
Really?
So through our model, what we try to instill in our clients is if you have a group of areas where you're generating the most profit or potential profit, try to stay within that footprint from a recruiting perspective, because otherwise, every time that driver goes home to their home zip, home domicile, they're generating a lot of empty miles or low paying loads in order to get them back home. And there's lots of anecdotal mentions of this person stays on the road 6 weeks at a time, blah blah blah. The reality is, even when they say they want to do that, it's not realistic to expect a driver to stay out long periods of time. It's just going to burn them out. So
Right.
keep them in the network and keep them moving, get them home frequently. That it's kind of a winning market, but that's one of the paths we can go down that's not strictly connected to customers lanes specific loads.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, we're actually coming down to it. And as you probably know, we don't generally run these webinars as kind of infomercials. But should people call you?
Yeah, well, the easiest way to connect with us is go to freightmath.com. That's our URL. It's also ksmta.com. So you can connect with us. We have a newsletter that we publish every month. It's called the Freight Math Newsletter. It's 100% educational, and that's, we feel, the best way to get an understanding of how our model works and how you can get involved with our model. But we'd love to talk to you if you're out there and you're in a position right now that you think there's opportunities to improve your profitability. Yeah, so that's the best way to connect with us.
But if they're unsure, just get the newsletter, look
Yep,
around the website, and see what y'all are talking about.
exactly.
Amazing. Well, Chris Henry, I don't see any questions in the queue. I want to thank you for joining this. This has been illuminating, disturbingly illuminating. These very, very, some would say obvious, some would say difficult things that you can do, but you can unlock all of these possibilities within a field of fairly difficult industry times.
Yeah,
So
it's all about iteration, small bites consistently.
small bites consistently. I love that. I will say to everyone, thanks for coming. And thanks again, Chris Henry. And we will see you all next month for the next episode.
Thank you,
Thanks
Rick.
again.